My name is Beatriz Ramirez, and I'm going to be your host today in this event organized by Systems Change Finland, where we're going to talk about the role of systems thinking enabling circular cities. And these topics are especially close to my heart because I work as a circular economy specialist at the city of Espoo. And in my free time, I'm a board member at Systems Change Finland Association. So I'm really, really excited to hear the insights from our wonderful guest, Jori, from the Dutch company Metabolic, who is going to tell us about how they are working with systems thinking and how they are helping cities in becoming more circular. Before we go into the topic, we would want to give you a short introduction to our association so that you know who we are in case you didn't know us yet. So we are a pretty new association. We started a year ago, and we seek to cultivate a society that can deal with systemic and complex challenges. And we do that by promoting the application of systemic approaches that can help people, organizations to understand and work with system complexity. We do our work in different kinds of ways. We are active in some projects, and we organize different sorts of events. One of them is our monthly Sensemaking meetups, as the one that you are being part of today, where we have the objective of not providing a one-sided presentation, but also to provide our audience, our participants with the possibility of making sense of the topics that we are discussing together with one another. So we're going to have some breakout rooms throughout the session so that you can discuss and learn and think together about the topics and about the insights that our great speaker is going to bring to us today. We are organizing this event as part of Nordic Citymaking Week, and we have with us Katja Lindros, who maybe wants to share a word about this forum.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, and very nice for you to invite me to say a few words on the behalf of Nordic Citymaking Week. Indeed, I'm Katja Lindros, and I'm the other program director of this bottom-up initiative. So we started Nordic Citymaking as a movement last year, and we organized also the first Nordic Citymaking Week last year in the cities of Vantaa and Helsinki. And this year we are really pleased to say that we have 3 cities already on board. So we have Turku, Vantaa, and Helsinki together. And this is also very much an open source movement. So we are already working on collaborations for the coming years that different parties can organize their own Nordic Citymaking events, their labs, their meetups, what have you. What we really look for is to create more connections. So to create more connection between sectors and between different cities and then of course countries and mostly city makers. And what we mean with city makers is both the bottom up and the top down parties. We look for with city making basically a way to create more connections between those. So what are the layers that are needed in order to have more interaction with the long-term processes of planning and building cities, but also the more spontaneous actions, the more let's say grassroots, more entrepreneurial approaches. Quite often these things are quite too far apart. And when we set up this as a movement, we wanted to start very much like just asking people, what would you like to discuss with this whole approach? So we co-created a manifesto, and from that manifesto, there was a very clear message that came out. We should work towards looking at ourselves, that we are the parties, all of us, who have to take the responsibility that everybody is included in this change. It is not the task of the cities, but it's also not the task only of the bottom up. It is really all of us together. And that inspired this year's theme, which is common ground, common place, to remind that we have to really actually work on creating this common ground. When our cities change, we have to think about what do we really share, how do we speak, how do we get everybody involved in order to then create those common places. all our events are free of charge, thanks to our partners, and we have numerous content partners, such as indeed Systems Change Finland. So we get fantastic program thanks to our content partners. And I would like to take the advantage here of inviting you all. So please visit our website and go and look at the program page. You can still sign up for events. You can follow those also on streams, but you can also come on location if you are here. So there is both conferences, but also really on the ground work, where we explore locations, we connect the topic with a locality where it is urgent. Just coming actually from one of these places, we had today the topic of broodplaatsen that maybe Jorrit knows really well. You are also in one of them, about how a city can enable more bottom-up activities in locations in temporary use. And we went to one of these places in Myyrmäki, and we were discussing what could this model be actually that could be implemented. So this is what we hope this discussion that you have today will create. We get inspiration, but we also find ways how we can bring it to each of our own contexts and really share those ideas in a more tangible way. So super happy about this, and I will definitely be all ears here. And best of luck with this Sensemaking meetup. And yeah, welcome to all the events, and enjoy your discussion today.
Thank you so much, Katja. We are also very happy to have you here with us, so that we can all, as you say, like together move in these important topics forward. And we are also very happy to have with us today's igniter, who is gonna sparkle our thinking. Let me please introduce Jori Verwoerdeldonk, hopefully that were right. Yeah, he works as a sustainability consultant in the city's team of Metabolic, a Dutch company, where he specialized in circular strategies for cities and regions, as well as monitoring the progress to a circular economy. But also Jori has a multidisciplinary background in engineering, sustainable energy, and management of technology. He's a strong believer in show, don't tell, and he has, for example, built a car powered by solar energy and raced it through Australia, because he wanted to show the world that the possibilities of sustainable energy. He has also founded a startup to develop engineering concepts, and Jori strongly believes that to transition to a sustainable economy, data-driven insights are needed, as well as strong communication, education, and collaboration between businesses and government. Do you want Jori to say a quick word before we move on?
Thank you. That was an excellent introduction, and also excellent pronunciation of my last name. You're doing better than most Dutch people, so good job. No, it's really nice to be here, and looking forward to discussion parts as well. I think for now I'll keep it short, but I have much more to share with you after the breakout session. Yes, thank you all for joining again. It's really nice to have the opportunity to talk to you today about circular cities and systems thinking. As Beatrice told, the first part will be a little bit more theoretical, high over conceptual, which is sometimes unfortunately the case with systems thinking, as it is quite a the part of it is that it's quite a complex way of thinking about problems, and it cannot be solved by a very straightforward one-sided solution. So that is what it is. But the second part, the second 20 minutes after the break, I will present two cases from our work at Metabolic, and actually one of them is very much a bottom-up case study of where we started in Amsterdam from indeed one of these broodplaatsen, and kind of scaled it up to the neighborhood in North Amsterdam. And the other one is a bit more of a top-down approach, where we did a circular strategy for the municipality of Rotterdam, which is the second largest city in the Netherlands, and kind of went from more of a city scan, so to say, in this broad perspective towards some solutions and interventions in the built environment. So I'll share those two later on. I will start very shortly with telling you about Metabolic. and indeed then the two parts which I just briefly explained before. So who is Metabolic? We are actually an ecosystem of organizations. So we're not just a consultancy, but we are 5 or 6 entities working together. And we're working with governments, business, NGOs, and academia to drive global system change. We do that with around 50 to 60 full-time employees at the moment, where we're at the moment working mostly in Europe and the US, but also expanding more towards Asia and Africa a little bit. And our mission is big, but we believe it's necessary, is to transition the global economy to a fundamentally sustainable and circular state. We do this by indeed like these 5 different vehicles, so to say. Part of it is what we do is we advise and implement our work. And for me, that's mostly working with city governments and people working in and around cities. But we truly believe that like to really make this system change happening, it's not just about advising these companies, but we also have to do something, have time to actually do some applied research and do some long-term thinking. So that's why we have our institute, where we do a bit more of our scientific research and work on longer term European research projects. We have our venture building arm, where we think, hey, if we actually found a systemic solution, we should also build it. So our first spin-off was Spectral Energy, who specializes in smart energy solution and now manages the largest amount of battery capacity in Europe. And we also have a software part of the team, which is the software development, also to make sure that kind of like the ideas which we come up with can be shared in a with a lot of different organizations in a way that doing case by case project work cannot achieve. And finally, we have a foundation that also tries to do community-driven development that democratizes that technology in different environments. So we are based in Amsterdam, in the north of Amsterdam. If you're ever there, please visit us. Indeed, we started once in Broedplaats de Keuvel, which is fun to visit if you're interested in our work, but also very fun to visit if you want to have a beer in the sun and chat to our colleagues. So please always reach out if you're in Amsterdam and you want to visit our circular playground de Keuvel. We work in approximately 40 countries. We work at the moment with 30 cities and with a lot of companies worldwide. And we say, like, if we want to achieve this global system change, we always look at kind of like this holistic perspective and try to find the sectors and regions which have the biggest impact. And our focus is therefore on these 6 key transitions, which we think are our focus areas to achieve this global systems change. So the one I will mostly talk about today, and which I also personally work on, is cities and regions. But we also work more on products and services to make sure the products we design and service we design are circular as well. We work on governance, on food and land use, also with lots of agricultural companies, in the finance sector, because that's obviously a very big lever as well to create change. And the last one is creating a mindset change, because if we can achieve that, lots of these other sectors and focus areas will follow suit as well. So that was really shortly about Metabolic. The next 15 minutes, I'll give a bit of an introduction about our systems thinking and circular economy approach before I'll dive into these 2 case studies. So yeah, what we set out with Metabolic, why we started out, because we saw there was lots of these curves that were having a very hockey stick curve, as they call it. Not only our population is expanding exponentially and our GDP, which is all great, but as a result of that, also our CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, our water use, our global biodiversity loss, and all these different things were exponential curves. I think in the last 2 years we've been fortunately all too familiar with them, which was not so great, but at least it made people realize that a lot of people realize how these exponential curves and these this acceleration works, and also made us realize that that's the same problem that we're facing with our planet and the climate. And how we usually look at this is from the planetary boundaries framework from the Stockholm Resilience Institute. So we're seeing that framework says that we're exceeding the boundaries of our planet. So there's kind of like this safe operating space, which for a lot of these boundaries exists. And for some of them, we're already exceeding it. And for some of them, it's rapidly getting there. And usually the discussion is about climate change and our carbon emissions. But as you can see on that figure, that's not even the one that's transgressed the most. It's actually the diversity loss and our biochemical flows that already exceeded the most on our planet. You can see these boundaries here as well. Like I think another framework that people usually use or recognize is Earth Overshoot Day. If we're looking a bit more from a materials perspective, I think it's now around August 1st. I think it's gone back 2 days because of COVID. So, but I'm pretty sure next year will already be earlier again. But we're using approximately 2 Earths in terms of resources to what our planet can sustain. And what we're actually going for is usually a framework that's usually used a lot as well. So donut economics, like how can we provide our human needs within these boundaries of the planets, so to make sure we have these ecological ceilings, but also make sure we provide a good life for everybody on this planet, including our biodiversity and natural ecosystems. We believe that to achieve this system change and make sure we kind of bend back these exponential curves, material use and resource use is an important leverage point. Approximately 10% of our materials nowadays get used or get reused at a high quality. What you see here is a bit of a complicated graphic, but what we've tried to map here is global material flows. So a couple of years back, we mapped for some of the biggest material flows. So you see here biomass, fossil fuels, ores, minerals, water, how much is extracted every year from our planet, and how much of it is actually reused at a high value. And approximately 10% of it is reused. But if you look at what we usually call like high value reuse, so to make sure that we can keep it into this loop and into this ecosystem, that's even a fraction of that. So that's definitely an important leverage point if we want to change that system. We see the circular economy kind of like as a way forward. It's not the end goal. It's a framework that's very useful to tackle many of the challenges we have, including climate change and including biodiversity loss. But how we now use, of course, many of our products is we add value, we use it, and then we destroy it again, which is visualized here by this poor tumbling package of the hill. But what we actually want to do, of course, is retain this value. Ideally by kind of like the highest R strategies, as they're called. So if we can retain our values, if we can repair or reuse or maintain it, that's the best. But try at least to keep it into our system and loop it back into that value hill. So in the end, we can keep reusing our scarce resources on this planet. As well as using less resources and keeping them into play, it also reduces the environmental and social pressure on our planet. Lots of the value chains, as you all know, create a lot of the environmental pressures on our planet, but also are part of very complex and very global value chains and supply chains, which a lot of the case do not create good social conditions for the people working on them downstream. And by implementing a circular economy, a lot of these value chains also become partly a bit more local, which reduces both the environmental and the social pressure on those sectors. One other theme, I think, which we're just discovering and which also is going to play a bigger role in the next couple of years, I believe, is our resource depletion risks. So on the right-hand side, there's a bit of a graph which needs a bit of explanation, but what it shows there is that the rare metals which are used in renewable energy, so in windmills, in solar panels, in electric cars, and that dotted line is the total global production, and you can see the bar charts going up. That's the total need which was predicted if we're following kind of like the predictions of how much we're going to need by 2050. So that means that a lot of, especially these scarce or rare metals, which we need for a lot of our energy transition, is also facing a quite severe resource depletion risk. So if we're managing to, if we design these systems, which we're now doing for electric cars, for windmills, for solar panels, that if we look at it, it's very important that we also think about the end of life for these materials. So can we get these materials back into the system? Can we reuse, can we recycle them? Which I think we also saw that now we're kind of struggling with the first or second generation of wind power, where we didn't really think about how we can reuse or recycle these systems, and we're now kind of stuck with them. Next to that, it can be a new driver for innovation and jobs. This is in the Dutch context, where they mapped what kind of jobs, revenue, less use of primary resources, and the link to CO2 emissions and water use can be seen, but also like quite a generator for new jobs, as these are usually in quite like labor-intensive markets where we're recycling, reusing, and refurbishing our products. Then a bit more towards our approach to it. At Metabolic, we always use the 7 pillars of the circular economy framework. Why we do that is precisely because we think from this systems thinking approach. So we think that usually when people talk about a circular economy, they're really focusing on the material and the resources side of things. But we always want to make sure we don't do something called burden shifting. If we're then reusing or recycling, more recycling our products, and we're using an intense amount of energy for it, is that really a truly circular and sustainable approach? So if we are thinking of these new solutions for our economy and for our cities, we should make sure that we're not only looking that materials in the economy are cycled at a high value, but we also should make sure that the energy is based on renewable sources. Water is extracted at a sustainable rate, our biodiversity is supported, and the kind of human side of things is structurally supported as well. So we make sure that if we transform our cities, that also the benefits reach all of the inhabitants of the city, for example, and that we're kind of starting to think a little bit different about our so-called business cases, where we're not just thinking about financial gain, but also more on gains for the environment and the social side of things. We always like to think about systems thinking as kind of like this Rubik's Cube, which I think is quite like a fun way to think about it. Like if you're turning one side of the Rubik's Cube, automatically all the other sides mess up. So a systems approach is inherently about understanding the complex dynamics and interactions within these systems, which can be a city, it can be a production chain, it can be a neighborhood. It also gives new insight in the root causes of these negative impacts, to make sure that we really have a good understanding of everything that's, like why is this showing up on the surface. It can help identify which interventions can leverage meaningful and lasting change, and it avoids what I previously said, this burden shifting, and provides insight in the trade-offs which you're making in selecting these solutions. Yeah, so I think first I showed you kind of like these already, the 6 focus areas resulting from that, where we should intervene in the system, where today we're mostly talking about the cities and regions side of that. Then quickly, before we go into the break, a little bit of a zoom in into cities and the built environment. If we're thinking about system change and a good point to intervene into the systems, cities are a exceptionally good point to start. If you're talking about like a leverage point, which has maybe not the biggest area on Earth, but a very large impact. Cities occupy approximately 3% of the global land surface, but consume approximately 70% of global resources and produce in the same range of our global greenhouse gas emissions. So if we manage to make a real impact into our cities, we're making a real impact on these 2 big transitions as well. The built environment is a driver for impact. I included this graphic. It's based on the Dutch context, but I think it ties together nicely the energy transition, the circular transition, and kind of like the carbon emissions debate. So on the left, you see Dutch national goals, like we want X amount of renewable energy generation and energy savings. We also want to use less primary resources. In the Netherlands, we have the goal of 50% less use of primary resources. And of course, the CO2 reduction goals. And then we see that the built environment, so what we're building in our cities, is responsible for 30 to 60% of each of these pillars. And then in the second and third, you kind of see that opened up, so to say, where you can see that for the energy and the emissions, most of it comes from the use phase. And that's mostly now still the way we heat and cool our built environment. And from the material side, of course, like most of it is in the construction phase, but also still up to a third in the renovation phase. So if you kind of like start zooming into these topics, then you also get to know like where to intervene in them. Here you can see kind of like the materials that contribute to these emissions or contribute to these materials that we use. And this is a further zoom in, like if we, this is also in the Dutch context, but if we look at the total mass of building materials used in the Netherlands, concrete, of course, a massive part of that, and also quite a big carbon emitter. But it's always quite good to look at the embedded emissions as well from that side of things to see like, hey, actually, what's the biggest mass? But also steel, for example, has a very large embedded carbon impact, as well as aluminum, for example. And one that's still quite small here because it's from a couple of years ago, but it's getting bigger and bigger as well, is the insulation materials we put in our built environment, which are quite a small mass percentage, but are getting a bigger and bigger CO2 impact in our built environment. Yeah, and these, I already said that this is also especially important in the built environment, where we're trying to make sure that by how we design and how we build our cities, we can also make sure that much more of these building materials and the products we use in our cities can be reused, refurbished, and remanufactured before they're recycled. Yeah, like a little bit of context on the latest circularity gap report. I think most of you might have seen it, but this kind of makes an assumption on how circular the world is, which is like this is a method of trying to map of all the activities into the world or a country, and if they are circular or not. You can see we're approximately at 9% in 2020, so there's still some way to go. But the circular economy is an excellent way to start reducing our material use worldwide by 28% and can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 39%. So once again, tying these 2 transitions together. So to start off, to kind of like end this part of the presentation, at Metabolic, we believe that we need to transform our economy, and we can do that by radically changing the way we design and plan our cities and design the value chains that enter into them, so to say. I think in many parts, and especially also in the Nordics and like Northwest Europe, we have made great progress kind of like the last couple of years to set these goals and ambitions without really knowing yet how to put them into practice, especially in our cities. And I think now is a really exciting time where we're kind of at the stage where we're translating these kind of insights and, hey, how does this system of a city actually work and where are the biggest impacts, to translating that into concrete projects and achieve that systematic transformation on the ground. And how we do that always is by this 5-step approach, where we always start with saying like, hey, we want to understand the current state analysis by a really data-driven approach where we map impacts and identify these root causes. Only then it makes sense to develop a vision based on these biggest impacts and leverage points. And after that, you can start thinking about interventions, implementations, and monitoring to make sure we're kind of tackling the right problems in this bigger system. Perfect. All right. Then to the 2 cases I was talking about, where the first one is Rotterdam is the neighborhood where we started as Metabolic as well. And the second one is a bit more of a top-down one, where we did a strategy for the city of Rotterdam for their circular strategy, and also started the project from there. So the first one, Rotterdam, it was really about transforming a neighborhood. Rotterdam is a kind of like a polder in the northern part of the city. It was an old industrial area. There was a lot of petrochemical industry, waste incineration, etc. And it's really like an area in transformation. If you get there now, it already looks very, very different to what it looked like on this picture. But it's doubling in size. But it was also quite a challenging area, as it was quite polluted because of the industry there. And the municipality of Amsterdam didn't really know what to do with it. So here you see it back in the day where it was kind of like an old industrial shipyard, and approximately 10 years ago, the municipality of Amsterdam wrote a tender and asked us in the end, together with some other companies which were all located in that neighborhood as well, to come up with a strategy for that neighborhood, which also started from this broedplaats, the Keuvel, where we started out as Metabolic. So coming back to that approach, which I showed you before, we started by kind of like mapping this neighborhood to make sure we understand well where this impact is in the neighborhood, and also where we can change the way it's designed in this fast-growing period of the neighborhood. So there was a lot of pollution, as I said, from this heavy industry there, but also showed that it's going to transform quite quickly the entire neighborhood into quite residential neighborhood in the future. So that was quite a transformation, which also meant there was quite a canvas to start imagining a new neighborhood, which was quite unique in central Amsterdam at that time. So what we did is more from kind of like that impact perspective. We mapped current versus future impacts. So that took into account like making sure we have a good idea of like where the water use goes now, like how much water is used by residentials, by industry, by offices and companies, and all these kind of things, and also like what comes out of it. Like here it's separated in gray and black industrial water, to really kind of like from all these flows flowing to the system to make sure we have a good idea of where that ends up at the moment. And the same we did Rotterdam plus 20 years, it says here, like estimating the amount of people that would be in the neighborhood, where could we start intervening in the system. The same we did with materials. I know it's very hard to read, but I'll walk you through it a little bit. It's like food, it's consumer products that's going in and waste coming out, and how is it at the moment? Is it landfilled, recycled, or incinerated? To get a good idea of where in the neighborhood the biggest impacts would be. And the same we did with energy. So for different types of energy, transport, but also mapping the local energy potential to make sure we have a good idea of if we would start implementing renewable energy solutions, where in the neighborhood could that be, and what percentage of our energy demand could that cover. We also kind of mapped people and make sure we have a good idea who's coming in, and also like who's working in the neighborhood, who's working where in the neighborhood, and kind of like what the socioeconomic flows in the neighborhood were. And based on that, we made these roadmaps where we mapped, this was a couple of years back, where we mapped like, hey, what in our idea from this mapping of resource flows would be the most effective solutions to make sure we're reducing that impact from these systems. So in these bubbles you see here kind of like the demand reduction relative to the business as usual scenario. So for the first scenario, like what these strategies would be most effective. So if we're going for passive housing standards for new constructions versus electric efficiency or mobility or smart grids, like what kind of solutions would be most effective in that. That in the end was it looks like quite a theoretical exercise now. It was actually a period of like a year and a half, which we talked to a lot of people in the neighborhood, had everybody on board, kind of co-designed neighborhood with them together to also in the end make sure translate that into design principles for a neighborhood. So we did it together with architects and with developers, where we kind of said like, okay, if we can redesign this neighborhood and if we want to implement these strategies, how would our new neighborhood look like, and how can we design that in a circular way? And at the end of this process, we made a manifesto, Circular Buiksloten Ham. And all these different parties signed this and said like, yeah, we commit to this ambition and make sure this neighborhood will be what we've found out in the last year and a half. So this is a lot of neighborhood initiatives, but it's also utility companies, the water companies, the municipality, some landscape architects, some other architects, some academic partners as well, where we've really tried to all the parties that are involved in this neighborhood to make sure we have this big festive moment where we say like, okay, this is what we want and this is what's going to happen in this neighborhood. If we to be honest, like it is still a process. So I think this manifesto is signed like 5-6 years ago, and then now if in the new plans for the neighborhood from the municipality, that is now finally translated into tendering guidelines, into new restrictions and new kind of like ways in which the neighborhood is designed. So that's still a long process, but I think for us it was a critical success point to make sure that in the end it was not just a good ambition, but it actually kind of like seeps through in all the plans in this neighborhood. The second case is from the municipality of Rotterdam, where we've tried to map kind of like the ecosystem of the city. And here you see kind of like that's more sector-based approach, where we say like, okay, how much energy, food, consumer goods, buildings, and we also mapped the healthcare, the hospital sector, what's going into this system. So what kind of bio-based materials or non-bio-based materials, minerals are going in. And on the other hand, like what's coming out in terms of waste, in terms of wastewater, and in terms of carbon emissions. And from that, we really focused on a couple of sectors, of which the built environment is a big one. So the municipality of Rotterdam said, okay, we know that a lot of kind of like value, a lot of materials are kind of like locked into the urban mine. So the existing buildings and infrastructure in the city, and a lot of value is also there. So if we want to move to a circular system in our city, we have to leverage all that material that's in there and make sure that we preserve that value, so to say. So what we've done for them is we predicted kind of based on their plans for the next 10 years, I believe, like where in the city demolition would take place. That's the red dots, and where new building projects are planned, to make sure like, hey, where are actually building materials coming available and where are they needed again in the city. So yeah, these numbers don't really matter, but there's of course like the new constructions projects outweigh the demolition projects, but still we have approximately 250,000 square meters of gross floor area being demolished until 2030, which is still of course a big impact to be had. So we also kind of like narrowed it down to make sure we could actually make a project of that. We selected 10 of the most interesting projects that contain 60% of those materials. And what we then did is actually map like, okay, if we want to reuse building materials, we really have to think more at the level of products. What are the materials? So to know how much concrete or aluminum is in the building is interesting, but in the end, if you want to start reusing building materials, it's much more about window frames or doors or steel beams or ventilation systems that might be feasible for reuse and refurbishment. So then we also made sure like we had a bit of a temporal understanding of that. So which of these elements would become available when, and we assessed interesting building materials for reuse. So like which of these can actually be reused. So window frames are one that's quite easy to reuse if they're still good enough quality. But we really make sure that we have a good understanding of what are the mass, the impacts and the costs of these different materials that become available, and what are the risks associated with that. And based on that, now the municipality of Rotterdam is setting up a big urban mining hub in the city, where these materials can be stored by different parties, and in that way they're becoming a big circular material hub within the city for their construction sector. And for that we also did a bit of a spatial analysis, like where are they becoming available and which location would be interesting also from a transport perspective to store these materials before they are potentially reused again. So in that way you kind of make a transition from kind of this analytically data-driven approach to a really concrete project where now they have like a big space in the city where they have where they store these materials and also provide access to different parties who wish to reuse these building materials. And it's always kind of like you are working within the city, but you're never, so to say, like a freestanding system within that city. So you're always kind of like optimizing between these economic and environmental distance thresholds. So like over which distance does it make sense for me to transport these materials, and what is kind of like the economic costs and benefits of that, of reusing or recycling that versus using new materials. So that's kind of like always a kind of another analysis layer that's underneath these kind of projects. Yeah, like here you can see kind of like the materials becoming available and being needed into a spatial framework, where we kind of map where the red ones are materials becoming available going to the building hub, and the green ones is where they are needed, also matched on kind of like a project that would be interesting to do so. Those were two quick introductions of cities we worked on. I could talk about it for a lot longer, but I think it's interesting, more interesting to have a bit of discussion left at the end of this meetup. So happy to take any questions from your side as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Jorrit. I see already we have some questions in the chat. Does, for example, Johanna Valinoro want to share with us the questions that she posted?
Yeah, sure. So my question was that how do you and when do you as organization like involve the inhabitants of the cities in your project? So how does it go, and what are these points that happen? And then I had another question, maybe for the participant more, that and like commentary, that it's really great, this idea that use the products instead of the materials, because that's also quite resource intensive and creates other problems when you take first everything back the raw material level and then you start redoing, and it's not always even possible. So I would be interested to know if this happens, if in Finland or in the Nordics there are like cases like this, that this kind of material usage is happening in a larger scale, because there are recycling centers, but I think that will not impact in a systemic, really, the thing that it would really have the big material impact. So thanks. It's very interesting to hear.
Thanks. I'm not sure I really got your first part of the question. I'm not sure, what was that? If it was directed at me, I didn't really get it, so sorry.
Yeah, sorry for being confusing. So mainly I'm interested, how do you involve the citizens of the city? So where do you involve, and how do you involve, or what is happening? A lot of things happen certainly with city administration or city leadership, etc. But the citizens.
You mean in general with these kind of projects, or do you mean specifically with the kind of like the urban mining project?
Yeah, you can explain, for example, with this project or in general as well.
Yeah, I think with this project, it was less citizen-centered, so to say, because for us, I was also really mapping in a city which kind of products are becoming available and which could be used again, and those are done by usually big building corporations or developers or demolition companies. So in this project, it was more like mapping, like which kind of, you also need a bit of scale to make this feasible, of course. So this was, I think, a bit less citizen focused. Of course, we will invite also citizens to come there and use these materials if they wish to do so. I think with a lot of other projects, it works really well on kind of like a neighborhood scale. Like if we want to make sure, like as we said, like one of the best ways to become circular is to create this mindset change. So if and that can be done really well on a neighborhood level if you create kind of like some facilities and some meetup locations and some infrastructure for them to be able to live a circular lifestyle. We really see that a lot of people love doing that. That started out with in the north of Amsterdam, where we started making this kind of playground for circular economy solutions, where everybody pitched in, but also in other neighborhoods in Amsterdam, we really see that once they get kind of like the freedom to do things, if it's like urban agriculture or if it's like repair cafes or kind of these kind of things, people really take it on themselves, and they're much better in doing so than a city government as well. So I think like for most of our projects, we see that on a neighborhood level, that's really where the citizens get involved, and they usually know much better which underutilized waste streams there are, for example, in the neighborhood, or where they could intervene.
Thanks for the answer.
Thank you, Jari. And I see that Minna Eronen has her hands up. Do you want to share with us your question, or is it a direct comment to Johanna's question?
It's a question that popped into my mind when Jari was explaining what he was just explaining, and it's about the scales. Because the projects that you've shown us so far, like huge big scale and huge big systems, and now you talk also about neighborhoods, and it's like a smaller scale system. And then my question to you is, how do you relate, or do you relate in your projects these bigger systems and smaller systems? How do they relate? How do you define the boundaries?
Yeah, I think both of them are equally important. It's just like they usually have a very different scope and very different stakeholders involved. So on a city level, you are mapping these gigantic building sectors and waste sectors, etc. So you're trying to intervene on an infrastructure level, or you're trying to say like, hey, do we need a big concrete recycling facility in the region and where to put it? But in the end, we also want all the people in the city to adopt a circular economy and a circular lifestyle, and that's just much easier or more effectively done on a neighborhood scale, I think. So we also believe that we have to work on all of these skills to really understand how we're doing it, because if you're only doing these big city strategies, you're not really facing what happens if you start tendering CPO plots on the neighborhood level, or you're trying to do organic waste composting on a city level and it smells and people don't want it. So I think we always try to work across these skills to kind of get to the really nitty-gritty on a neighborhood scale and talk to people and go create interventions with them, as well as saying like, hey, concrete is 7% of our global carbon emissions worldwide. I think we probably should put some concrete recycling facilities in our country, and where should we put them? So I think it's really both of those that need to work hand in hand.
Thank you, Jari. I see we have plenty of questions in the chat. Mikael is asking, how do you do the research on the material flows? I guess the data isn't available upfront. If you, Mikael, want to complete your question, you're welcome to. If not, Jari, you can answer.
Yeah, I think that those visualizations you had there were like really impressive. So you can get the big picture of those things, but I guess they're also based on whatever area that you are working on. So yeah, that's where my question regarding how to do the research comes in, because I bet I used to work in open data, and I bet the data is available up front. So you have to do some research.
Yeah, that's true. I think luckily circular economy is developing quickly, so also most databases aren't designed for use in a circular economy. However, there is quite a lot of information available. So part of it is cleverly putting together existing data sets. So that's on waste management, on commercial waste. There's usually good data available. But for example, we also develop our models where we know, for example, if we build X amount of buildings in this housing topology, we're kind of like developing a tool on a database where we know which kind of building materials are used in which kind of housing topologies. So it's really a big puzzle of tying together all these different sectors to get a complete picture of a system, even if it's a city or a neighborhood. But yeah, it's quite a puzzle, but luckily it's taking shape slowly, where also governments are collecting more data on this.
Thank you, Jari. At least in Espoo, what we find sometimes is a challenge is to find the local data. Maybe we can find it maybe even on a region level, but then when it comes to the city, sometimes it can be challenging. I was wondering, do you work mostly with estimations or like based on the citizens, the population, or do you actually have like that kind of data?
We have some of it. We don't have all of it. So yeah, the project always becomes better if we have more bottom-up data, of course. So usually we try to, if it's not very close to us, we try to work together with some organizations who also have the capacity to do some on-the-ground data gathering, so who can visit some of the largest companies in the region and see what kind of inputs and outputs they have, and map some of the construction sector as well. But indeed, unfortunately, there's no well, not unfortunately. Fortunately, there is no real barrier around the city, so it's hard to track material flows going in and out, of course.
Thanks. Then I'm seeing we have a question from Dora as well. Do you use the idea of self-sustainability when it comes to circularity? You want to open up your question a bit, Dora?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because now we see, because of COVID, how chains have broken up and all the delays and everything. And in terms of economics as well, it's taking, it's becoming more and more important to talk about bioregions supporting themselves. And then if you work on neighborhoods and cities, are you able to, zoom out enough to have this kind of, okay, we can rely on what's around us instead of, circular, but from other parts of the world. So I'm just wondering how close you try to bring those material flows, like when it comes to, I don't know if you work with food, for example, or whatever else, but yeah, that's kind of my question. You are muted, you're it.
Sorry, I said it's an interesting one, also a difficult one to answer, as you probably also experience in your own work. We always say, like, we try to close these materials loops and these these loops on a scale that makes sense. So I think definitely what we've seen during COVID as well, lots of these supply chains can be much more local, and we should also try and do so, especially if we're also trying to repair, like at the end of the chain, trying to reuse and repair and recycle these systems. It makes sense to have them a lot more local. But for some of them, you just also kind of, like, from a economic perspective, to really make them worthwhile, you need a certain scale. So and that relates a bit to that point which I made on, like, one of the last slides. It's kind of like matching these environmental thresholds and these economic thresholds. So, like, what kind of, like, scale do you need to make a good business case, to transport it, etc., versus what kind of impact are you making by making it a local chain, so to say. So a lot of things can be done on a neighborhood scale if you're talking about energy, if you're talking about organic waste, but a lot of things also cannot. So I think we usually think about building materials as kind of like a regional scale. Food can also, for a part, be done on a regional scale, while consumer goods and those kind of things are really hard to make them on a regional or even a national scale, as they're global supply chains which we're facing. So I think it's a bit of a pragmatic, but also kind of like the balance between economic and environmental pressures, which we usually try and evaluate to assess on which scale it makes sense to close the loop.
I see a comment in the chat from Dora again, who says that this also brings up the question of democratizing production and manufacturing. So anything you want to add to this?
No, good point. Like, I think it is something we can talk about for ages, but yeah, it is.
Yeah, exactly. And we have 6 minutes left of the Q&A, so I'm going to invite everyone to quickly think, is there something still bubbling that you will ask, you will want to ask Jorit? But I see that we have here one more question from Ricardo Serrano. How circularity can help to regenerative practices? Does Ricardo want to add something to his question?
No, I think I was wondering how we can apply to actually restore the disimbalances in the environment in cities and in the built environment and in social ecological systems, because we're kind of intertwined with that. And so, well, how it was, if you have some sort of a broad view about that, or just I want to know what are your thoughts on that? Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Ricardo. Do you want to share something with us, Jori?
Yeah, I think we definitely do. I think it ties into kind of like that link we also make with the planetary boundaries and kind of like the ecosystem tipping points, which we're all very familiar with. So I think when we talk about circularity, we always take into account kind of like the natural ecosystem, natural boundaries, especially some of my expertise, but a lot of the work we do in agri-food and agriculture is mainly focused on these regenerative agricultural practices and making sure we design these cycles with nature instead of using it. So I think the two go hand in hand very well. If you're interested more into kind of like the agricultural regenerative practices, I would say nose around on our website, because there's quite a lot of interesting articles and projects around that as well.
Thank you, Jori. Yeah, we are coming to an end in our event. I will still want to share with you quickly, with you all, a bit more of our association, and then so that if you want to be more active, that you can join us and that you can hear in which way you can do that. But you are still welcome to post the last question. So please think about it if there is something still bubbling. But as we said at the beginning of the session, Systems Change Finland, we are over a 1-year-old association. We are very active in different channels. So if you want to hear what we are up to, please follow us on Facebook. We have a community of almost 3,000 members right now. We are also active on Twitter. And if you want yourself to take action and maybe be part of a project or organize some event, we are very open to anyone who wants to join us. So you can join us on Slack. And I'm sure that Mikael pretty soon will be adding all the links in the chat so that you can follow us. And if you want to support our association, you are also welcome to become a member. There is almost 100 of us. I think last time I checked, it was 99. So you can help us to become the 100, to achieve the 100 milestone. But that's all I wanted to share with you right now. I'm wondering if there is one last question. Is there anything, someone dying for asking something before we end?
Maybe I can pose another question because I didn't see any other ones here. But yeah, in Finland, we're starting to have, this discussion regarding mindsets. So it was really interesting, Jori, that you were speaking that mindsets is actually one big area or one big leverage point that Metabolic is trying to tackle. But in Finland, we are still maybe a little bit in the abstract side of developing mindsets. So if you have any good pointers for that, how we might bring that into practice, we'd be really happy to hear more about those.
Yeah, I think the mindsets, I always find it interesting, and it's always when I talk about systems thinking, I recommend everybody that little book Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. It's you read it in an hour, but I think it's a great way to think about these things, and indeed like changing the mindset is also one of her key points in that, creating leverage points in that system. I think sometimes how I think about it is like kind of like this transition management framework. So you kind of like have to break down the old system and bring up the new one. So in a way, I think some of the parts is about actually educating a lot of people who kind of like keep in place that old system. But I think also a lot of quite great initiatives in the Netherlands are geared towards just helping out people in changing their mindset and making it easy for them to become circular. So there is a big Versnellingshuis, like an acceleration place in the Netherlands for businesses where they can come and they are kind of like given the resources to just do it. And the same with a lot of citizens where it's made very easy for them to become circular in a way. And I think in that way, it's because people can understand it conceptually, but if it's not easy for them to change kind of like their behavior towards it, then that step is usually where still now it's going a bit wrong. So I think helping, especially kind of like on an SME and like a citizen level on cities, giving them really easy tools to start doing it is, I think, what's proving quite effective in the Netherlands. So giving them like a little free scan for their company to see what they're doing and what kind of value they're using by throwing away resources now, or giving people who build their own homes or are renovating like some little budget or some little resources to actually see what they could do to become a bit more circular is quite an easy and effective way to change their mindset towards it as well, I think.
Thanks, Jorid. I think this gives me personally, and hopefully many others, a lot of good insights and inspiration to carry out our work. Time is already 6:30, so I think it's time to finish the official session. We stop recording and streaming, and I want to thank you, Jorid, so much for joining us today. You are welcome to stay as everybody else if you want to keep the discussion, but now the idea is that we have just an informal conversation for the people who want to continue to chat. But the meeting has like officially ended, and we look forward to seeing you, Jorid, and many of the people who join in our future events organized by Systems Change Finland.